Hello, friends of Adam Mark Writes. If it isn't obvious, I'm Adam Mark. Hey, thanks for reading along. If you joined for this kind of Civics 101, Constitution 101 4-week group reading, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here. If you've been a subscriber here for a while, I hope that you're comfortable with just changing course just a little bit for the next month as we dig into some of the historical context of the United States Constitution. It's really my effort just to make sure that we know what's actually in there. I've articulated this some in a couple of my posts so far that were written, but let me just speak to it quickly. So I think that one of the best forms of resistance is to know exactly the rights that we have today. Now, if you've read previous posts, then you know I was inspired by this article that I read about someone who was resisting within the Soviet Union at the time. And their claim, the author's claim as a resistance force within the Soviet Union, was that it wasn't as though they were operating within a state that had no rights. Rather, they were operating within a state where the rights were not enforced. And so that's one of the ideas that I'm really carrying with me as we're beginning to encounter, a constitutional crisis. I mean, that's such an academic term. Let's break it down just a little bit. What I mean to say is that currently in President Trump's administration, we do see some skepticism from the executive branch about adhering to some of the constitutional restraints that are meant to rein in the power of the executive branch. What we'll learn together, what we already started reading this week with respect to the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, is that there was a concern among the framers that the government could become tyrannical, and that tyrannical government would live out in the form of an executive branch that takes too much power for itself. So that was a concern that the framers had. And so they addressed that concern through some of the Federalist papers, which we'll get to next week. But my idea is that as we see how the current administration is beginning to raise skepticism with respect to the restraint on their powers as articulated in the Constitution, it's a good idea for all of us citizens to understand, how are we bound by the Constitution? How does the Constitution bind a government? Now, here's the idea, is that the president is given its authority. The office of the president is given its authority by the Constitution. So on a hierarchy, so to speak, the Constitution is above the president. If there were no Constitution, there would be no office of the president. So the president does not get to decide what the Constitution says. Rather, the Constitution gives the authority to the executive branch and then restrains that authority within broadly what we call the separation of powers. So when the president raises skepticism about following judicial orders, that presents to us some blurring of the lines around the three distinct branches of government, and seems to be the executive branch saying, we don't have to listen to you, judicial branch. Now, we're going to get through all of this in the next few weeks together. But what I think is that we're better able to diagnose some of that consolidation of power in the executive branch when we understand not only what the Constitution says today, but what the concerns were that led to the development of the United States Constitution itself. And in fact, understanding where the Federalists were and where the Anti-Federalists were is going to help us begin to develop some historical context, which will help thinking critically about the United States Constitution itself. So that's kind of the program. That's kind of what we've been up to just this first week of readings. And if you're not reading, you can look at my summaries. Take this at your own pace. Now, I want to just reiterate this also. I am no expert. Now, I'm also no dummy, but I'm not an expert. I did not go to law school. I'm not a lawyer. I went to, I'm a philosopher by training, and a lot of philosophers end up going to law school. One of my close buddies, who was a classmate of mine in grad school, currently is a lawyer, and I've been in dialogue with him about some constitutional things. But at any rate, I'm learning just in the same way that many of you may be learning. So I'm not here to provide expert direction. Rather, I'm here to facilitate dialogue among us as just interested and concerned Americans. And I think one way to resistance is to do what this resistance force in the Soviet Union did, which is to say, let's not say that we are without rights, but let's acknowledge that we have rights, but those rights are not being enforced. So that's what motivated the study. Don't treat me as an expert. I'm just here to kind of facilitate our guided reading together. Okay, cool. So it's Wednesday, and what I thought I'd do today, or each Wednesday for the next 4 weeks, is just give us a discussion prompt that we can respond to. Now, I think the best way to do this would be in the Substack chat. That is a capability, a function, a feature of Substack that is accessible both on the browser-based website view, also in the app. So if you've got the Substack app, that's a great way to engage not only in the chat, but also in notes, which is kind of like a Twitter clone style, kind of a social media timeline of sorts. So get the app or just hop on the website. I think the chat is going to be the most effective place for us to have group dialogue, because I don't want this to be just like, oh, maybe you read a thing, maybe you think some about it, maybe you have a one-line sort of takeaway, and then that's it. I'd love for us to be an ongoing dialogue. Now, if you've looked at who's already introduced themselves in the chat, we already have kind of a burgeoning multi-generational group that is here. Different political affiliations and backgrounds. At least different political affiliations from birth. I don't know where everybody is today, but we have a couple of different upbringing differences in the folks who have introduced themselves already. We do have folks, for whatever it's worth, different faith alignments, and some no faith alignment at all. So, we've got a bit of a pluralistic group here, which is great. And I want it to continue to grow and continue to engage. So I think the chat is going to be the best way where we can have real-time sort of conversation with each other. So if you go direct the browser right to the Adam Mark Writes on Substack, or just get out the smartphone app and we can chat that way. What I'd like our chat to be about this week, and we're starting like really 101 level here. Now, I realize that we're not getting into like robust, nuanced distinctions of constitutional law. Thus far, I've not provided much application to current events. I really want us to get solid on the foundation and then see how we can enhance the conversation from there. So what I'd like us to talk about right now is anything that you discovered about federalism or about the Federalists and the Federalist Papers. I know we're going to read a couple of those next week, but think some about federalism. Do you understand that federalism's position was to have a strong central federal government, and the Anti-Federalists felt like, no, that will lead to tyranny. We need states' rights. So the state rights people come out of an anti-federalist interpretation of the best governance for the burgeoning country at the time. But certainly today, we continue to have debates about a strong central federal government versus states' rights. So I want us in the chat today to think some about where do you fall out on federalism, anti-federalism? Where do you fall out on a strong central government versus states' rights? Not that those need to be mutually exclusive. I think ultimately we landed, as you've read some about this week, that federalism sort of wins the day to some extent because we do have a strong federal government, but there are a lot of concessions and compromises made to the Anti-Federalists, namely in the production of the Bill of Rights that protects or is designed to protect individual liberties while also holding in place a strong central government. So there's a little bit of a compromise where things end up. So, and listen, I've also tried, I just want to make this clear. I don't have, I understand the Patriot myth. I think I mentioned like Tad Sturmer, he's a great social media personality, Stoermer, Tad Sturmer, terrific public historian. He talks about the Patriot myth. I do not want us to apply a halo effect to the founders or the framers. They were flawed men, and they were white men, and they were wealthy land-holding men. So I always want to keep that in mind and not put any blinders on about that. But I also want us to connect ourselves to the Constitution as a living document. So that's a little bit of a long video, but it was the first one of the 4 weeks. I'll try to get a little bit shorter in future weeks. But yeah, in the chat, why don't you just talk some about, did you learn anything about federalism, anti-federalism? Are you beginning to feel drawn to one perspective over another? Are you beginning to see hints of how these debates continue to show up in a modern political discourse? So, hey, I'm Adam. Thanks for reading along with me. If you're a longtime reader, thanks for hanging out. If you joined for the kind of guided group constitutional reading, I hope so far we're kind of off to a good start here. I look forward to seeing your comments in the chat. All right, much love, fam. I'm out. Peace.